So maybe let's talk a bit more about grounding and other ways in which people or the listeners can gather electrons and build up their I guess cellular potential or their
Yes.
there is
We can call it anything. Some people call it their redox, other people call it their battery, other people will make it so complicated nobody understands. But I think fundamentally with grounding, because there's constant electrical strikes on the Earth, a lot more around the equator, this coats the surface of the Earth with a negative charge, and electrons, just in very simple physics, do have a negative charge. So if we can connect with the Earth with bare feet, so our feet and hands are a bit sweaty naturally, and they're designed by the Creator or Mother Nature or the universe to be able to connect properly with the Earth. So in order to ground properly, some people think it's just standing barefoot on some mud outside, but gardening would be grounding because you're touching plants and things which are grounded. A lot of people forget their hands can ground.
That was Dr. Sara Pugh, and you've landed on the me&my Health Up podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today on the show, I have an expert in quantum healing. And as I've said in previous episodes, that 2024 is the year that I'm going to be sharing a lot of content on quantum healing, because that is where the foundation of healing begins. And I want you to work on foundation principles in terms of enhancing and enlightening your well-being. And so Dr. Sara Pugh is an anti-aging specialist. She started her career as a research scientist with a degree in biochemistry and genetics from the University of Leeds in the UK. She also has a Ph.D. in molecular mechanisms and biophysics. That's a tongue twister. She also did a research project on the protein folding, and this is in relation to dementia. And also her research led her down the path of looking at statins and cholesterol and heart health, as well as dopamine. But it didn't stop there. Sara's curiosity went well beyond the lab. She actually left the lab to pursue a career where she could help people and spend less time in the lab working with little widgets and digits and all those things that petri dishes that you work on in the lab. And she wanted to work with people and help people. So she became a Pilates instructor. She then went on to Reiki. She then went on to spiritual healing. She then went on to hypnosis. And she's just constantly evolving her skill set. And she also got a medical ketosis qualification so that she can prescribe ketosis effectively in a medical sense. So she's constantly evolving her education. She shares so much wisdom in this episode on quantum healing in terms of what it is, so it doesn't scare you off. So it actually invites you into understanding quantum physics, quantum healing, and then how you can apply that pragmatically to your lifestyle and what works. And we cover this from a light perspective in terms of sunlight. We cover it from a water perspective. We cover it from a magnetism perspective in terms of grounding. And so it's a very holistic episode. We talk about energy gain, energy losses, and how you can maximize your energy. There's so much insight, there's so much insight that I've invited Dr. Sara Pugh back on to the me&my Health Up podcast, and she's gratefully accepted because she can share so much wisdom beyond this episode, and we can go down rabbit holes based on what your feedback is from this episode. And so we can explore deeper dives into other areas of quantum healing that you want to know more about and how you can apply it to your everyday life. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Dr. Sara Pugh. Welcome on the me&my Health Up podcast. How are you, Sara?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Nice to meet you, Anthony.
So great to have you on. I've been following you for a long time in terms of your podcast, and you share such enlightening information on quantum physics, quantum healing, and all things quantum in terms of the health and wellness space. So I shared with my guest at the start of this year that I really wanted to get more. Well, I shared with the listeners, not the guest, on the Me and My Health Up podcast, that I wanted to get experts on this topic of quantum healing. And so you're the first expert I have on this topic. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, no, I'm really honored to be the first one. So that's great.
So my first question to you, and the listeners will be very familiar with this one, is how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
Okay, I actually, just to backtrack, my degree was in genetics and biochemistry, and then I did biophysics, Ph.D, working on protein folding, but it was quite a sort of broad Ph.D. It was multidisciplinary. So that's when I first came across quantum physics, because I worked on fluorescence and photons and electrons. That's sort of the crux of quantum biology. So that's was my background. But then after a while, I got disillusioned with science, because I worked on a variety of projects, from genetic promoters in moss to dopamine receptors, which people might have heard of, to do with mood and addiction. Then I worked on statins and cholesterol. And after working on them for about a year, I sort of saw through what was going on with publishing research just to push certain pharmaceuticals. So this was back in 2008. So in 2010, I left to do something totally different, to be a Pilates teacher. And I learned lots of other movement as well, from somatics to Feldenkrais and Olympic lifting, basically anything movement. And that led me into sort of a more right-brained world, where I met lots of Reiki teachers and people that did Bowen therapy. And I started learning myofascial release and Bowen technique, because again, things like traditional healing modalities like acupuncture and all of those, we all know that they work. It's just science at the moment can't explain properly. Then that led me into hypnosis, which it started off, I wanted to do therapy, but then I did a stage hypnosis, and I got sort of quite into close-up magic as well, because I've always been interested in unusual things. And having been a scientist for a long time, it's very lonely in a lab with chemicals and bacteria and stressed people. So it was great to get out and just do things with other humans. So that's sort of a very sort of quantum approach about how we're all connected in some way, and energy fields. Then I've always been interested in supplements and nutrition. I've fallen out with supplements a bit more recently, just because there are certain problems with quite a lot of them. So I have been trained in medical ketogenic diets, which, they're, useful for everybody. And there's a very quantum reason of why we can look at food through a quantum lens. It's not just stuff that we eat, it's information, lots of things I could talk about there. And I then sort of looped back into quantum biology around 7 or 8 years ago, because I think Dave Asprey was the one that started off with the blue blocking glasses and talking about red light. So that's when I got back into sort of the more light side, or the physics side. And then ever since then, I've just been finding new rabbit holes to go down, new clients to work with, problems I can't solve and then I can solve. So that's how I ended up back doing quantum biology, because luckily I do have a background in physics, even though I'm not particularly good at it, because I'm not very good at maths. It really helps me to explain quantum biology to people, because when somebody say like Einstein or Jack Kruse, they're so above us in intelligence, they're not able to bring it back down to earth and show people, okay, well, there's all of this physics, but all people want to know is, how do I make it practical? How can I explain it very simply to my family or my partner of why I'm doing this? And that's why it's actually an advantage I'm not particularly good at maths, because I've only got a limited way I can explain quantum physics. And luckily, it's something that resonates with the general public, and also people who are interested in health. We all know so many things work. Sometimes everything works if you actually persist with it. So I think looking through a quantum lens has really helped me to, understand how all these different modalities work, how nutrition works, how minerals work, how light works. And it's also very unifying with other practitioners, because I'm not into all of this, I'm right and you're wrong. I'm all about, I know how to do this and you know how to do that. I understand how your way works. I just don't know how to practice in that way. So I just tend to stick with my physics and my sort of 20 odd so years of experience, and then see if I can share the quantum perspective with people, because it can help give them sort of a reason or confidence into why what they're doing is working. And I think if you believe in your own therapy, the whole putting positive thoughts into the quantum field, not doubt, I think it helps a lot with sort of holistic medicine, because there's all sorts wrong with scientific research and it really hates anything holistic. Whereas if you break holistic medicine down into sort of looking at it through a quantum lens, we can see easily why that's working and why mainstream medicine tries to stuff it under the carpet.
Yeah, no, there's so much to dig into from what you've shared, and I'm really keen to really just get into the definition of quantum, because we may have lost some listeners already just talking about this whole thing of quantum physics, but you're really good at explaining it, and having followed you for quite some time, I think you can really relate to the general public. So, yeah, if you could just share in terms of what is like quantum healing and how it relates to quantum physics and how it can really support us in being well.
Okay, I suppose with quantum or quanta, it just means packet. So light comes in a quanta or a packet, but also quantum can mean quantum mechanics, where we look at what are the subatomic particles doing. So before any listeners run away, if we just think about hydrogen and the sun, for example, that the way the sun works, it's a giant ball of plasma and it's 93% hydrogen. And the way in which the hydrogen and the deuterium, people have got different theories of how the sun makes light and heat, but we all agree that the sun, we can't live without it, and hydrogen is what powers it. So obviously hydrogen is something really important on a big level, and the sun again powers our circadian rhythms, our body clocks, and that's part of quantum biology as well, because it relates to how light controls biology. And then inside the body, at a very sort of, if we jump from the sun to inside us, hydrogen is the universal giver of energy, because it does so much in the body. Everywhere there's a molecule in the body, there's hydrogen attached to it, and it moves around in the body and participates in reactions. It's part of our water battery, which is sort of a semiconductor system. People don't need to sort of worry too much about the terminology, but again, we are fundamentally a water battery with other sort of energy systems on top, and hydrogen being part of water is really important energetically. Then hydrogen is so small, it's a brilliant antioxidant. And I'm sure lots of your listeners have heard about antioxidants, whereas because hydrogen's so tiny, it can get everywhere in the cell, whereas lots of commercial antioxidants that people buy are just simply too big and they can't get past the sort of water, the hydration in the body, because every single surface in our body is coated with water and some things can't get through, but hydrogen can just get through whenever it wants. And just on a simple level, our gut microbiome makes hydrogen for us. I'm not talking about just protons. I mean molecular hydrogen as well. And everybody knows that having a healthy gut is important. And there's lots of different reasons why. And I'm just giving hydrogen as an example. Then if we look at another thing that you might find at a subatomic, hydrogen, I would say, is an atom. But if we go inside the hydrogen, it's got an electron. And people who probably heard of electrons in terms of current flowing in, whereas again, we are a water being, but we're also an electric being as well. And none of modern medicine doubts this in any way. We've got ECGs and EEGs, and we know the brain's electrical, the heart's electrical. So these electrons, they provide the electric current in the body. So when we look at a wire, people think it's the electrons carrying energy, but they actually make an electric field. But they're still really important. And I just say to people, in order to function well, the more electrons that you've got, which you can get from grounding, you can get them from water, you can make sure things don't steal your electrons. This is going to help power sort of the information flow in the body, because electrons carry information. And this quantum information is really important when we do talk about quantum biology. And again, just for simplicity for people, grounding is one way you can gather electrons. And I just say to people, it's just another way to charge up your battery in the body, because in simple terms, if we don't have enough electrons, we're more likely to have inflammation, or actually it does cause inflammation. So if we've got an imbalance between electrons and protons, it's not that hydrogen or protons are bad, it's the fact we don't have enough electrons that creates inflammation. And then another very important quantum molecule is deuterium, which is an isotope of hydrogen. So we may or may not talk about this, I'm not sure, but if people have too much deuterium and not enough hydrogen, then they can get inflammation as well. And just in sort of keeping it simple for today, most diseases revolve around having too much inflammation or too much stress. And there are so many different ways we can talk about health. So that's how I look at things, would be about how hydrogens and also carbon is really important in the body, but also just talking about electrons with people, because it's kind of something we've heard of in school, but maybe didn't realize that we're full of them as well. And all the electrons in our body, because they carry information, they know exactly what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to go. They don't just buzz around inside us like a big swarm of bees. Everything's carrying quantum information and going where it's supposed to go and doing what it's supposed to do. And the other reason that the quantum physics confuses people so much is because, first of all, it's invisible, and secondly, the laws of sort of ordinary physics, like Newton's law, when we get down to the quantum level, it's very, very unusual and weird what happens. So atoms or molecules can be in several places all at the same time. They can do that sort of down at the molecular level inside, say, a cell. And obviously we know that we can't be in two places at once. And also electrons can travel through matter. For example, in the mitochondria that your listeners may be aware of, our cellular batteries, that the electrons tunnel down the electron transport chain, but they're actually traveling through matter because there's stuff in the way. But me and you know that we can't travel through a wall. So this idea of, when we get down to the quantum level with biology, it's all paradoxical, but it's also really interesting and exciting. And it's also a whole new field that our ancestors knew a lot about this. For example, the Sufis and Kabbalists and shaman, they just didn't know how to explain it because microscopes and things, and Einstein wasn't around then. So it is something that it's not new. It's just we're beginning to understand how we work at a sort of quantum level.
I really appreciate what you've just shared there, and there's so much we could go on about in terms of delving into particular areas, but I'm really keen to, you spoke about the charging the battery and gathering electrons, and that's really important in terms of staying well and healthy. And you mentioned the fact that we can ground ourselves. So maybe let's talk a bit more about grounding and other ways in which people or the listeners can gather electrons and build up their, I guess, cellular potential or their
Yes.
There is, yeah.
We can call it anything. Some people call it their redox, other people call it their battery, other people will make it so complicated nobody understands. But I think fundamentally with grounding, because there's constant electrical strikes on the Earth, a lot more around the equator, this coats the surface of the Earth with a negative charge. And electrons, just in very simple physics, do have a negative charge. So if we can connect with the Earth with bare feet, so our feet and hands are a bit sweaty naturally, and they're designed by the Creator or Mother Nature or the universe to be able to connect properly with the Earth. So in order to ground properly, some people think it's just standing barefoot on some mud outside, but gardening would be grounding because you're touching plants and things which are grounded. A lot of people forget their hands can ground, so you can sit, say, on a metal bench or a concrete bench and put your hands down, and then those materials can conduct the electrons. And with grounding, part of it is it makes people go outside, but also the other thing about electrons is, which I was going to come into, is we need to charge them with light. So that's Einstein's photoelectric effect, that we are a solar panel. So we gather these electrons in, and then we're outside in sunlight, and then this light can then excite the electrons. So again, this is part of us being a light being, because we're lots of things: water, electricity, light. We're not just a lump of meat. So that's how the combination of grounding outside and being outside in full spectrum sunlight is a really great way to charge yourself up. And most people will just notice this or know this anyway. The other thing that's really helpful for grounding is water. So kids like going out in the rain and playing in puddles and splashing all over. And then lots of adults like to swim in the ocean or swim in a lake. So when you go into water like that, it's sort of a full body experience, it's full body immersion. and that's like a super grounding experience, and you're outside and you're a bit cold as well, which again is something that's beneficial for health. So there's lots of different ways to ground. And sometimes people forget that other materials can ground. So say if you have a basement or a cellar that doesn't have any plastic or anything on the ground, you can actually ground inside your house, especially the lower down in your house you go, because you're closer to the earth and the earth's magnetic and electrical field. And it's something, even if people can't bear to take their shoes off, because I know a lot of people have issues with feet and their feet, you can use leather soled shoes, or you buy grounding shoes, or you can make grounding shoes, and it's not particularly difficult or expensive, so you get a double bonus if you've got grounding shoes on. I mean, you need grounding socks as well if you're going out for a walk in nature. And to us nowadays, doing something like 2 or 3 hours of grounding is sort of a great feat. And there are some people that have been disconnected from the earth for 20 years and just connected to technology, whereas our ancestors have probably just grounded sort of non-stop. So it is something important to do. And also there are studies on grounding, and it's one of the best ways to lower inflammation. There are studies on cardiovascular disease. But it's one of these things, it's so obvious. In some ways, scientific research won't fund grounding because there's no money to be made at the end, because it's like telling people to go outside. Well, everybody knows you're supposed to do that. And that's wherein it can be sort of regarded as a bit woo-woo, people thinking about hippies going barefoot. But it's actually fundamental to our health, with this connection with nature, whether it's just being out in it or actually standing on it from a physics perspective and connecting and grounding yourself electrically. It is massively beneficial for health. And also it gets people away from artificial light and too much TV and technology. So there's numerous benefits for grounding and so many different ways that you can do it. And things like stuff when people do stuff as a family, going out and foraging, picking fruit, because children love doing things like that, and picking stuff, and or even litter picking, that's going to obviously ground you because you've got to constantly touch things. So there's lots of ways to do multiple things with grounding outside with your family and doing a service to everybody else. I sometimes do pick up litter because I don't know, I think it's just, you feel like you should give back now and again. But plus, there's the selfish motive that I'm outside and I'm grounding.
Fantastic. It's something my daughter and I do on a regular basis, is picking up litter. So we certainly love a clean environment, and it's now the added bonus of grounding as well. So that's awesome to hear that.
Oh, no, that's really good that you do that as well, because my dad was really obsessed with litter and he used to get really upset about it. But the amount of litter or trash, if people, depending on what they want to call it, it just seems to grow. And it is quite interesting looking at other people's trash. I mean, you can learn all sorts about what people put in the bin, but you never see a bit of meat or an egg. It's always Coca-Cola bottles or McDonald's wrappers. It's always sort of the rubbish food, cans of Red Bull and beer and stuff like that. So I think part of it sort of reflects other problems that we have with people and their health. But that's great that the children around here do it, because they get something like 5p per can. So they know that I pick up litter, and obviously I give them all my cans. They'll go out all day. And you know what children are like with money, that even a little, like one Australian dollar, they'd get lots of kids be excited at that. So I think it's a really good way to get children out in nature doing stuff. And they might protest for 5 minutes and then they just get really into it. And especially if there's a reward at the end.
That's a fantastic. We should start up some sort of competition, a global movement for picking up rubbish and rewarding people for doing so. I was just thinking, in terms of the grounding, obviously the more the merrier in terms of spending time outside and feet on the ground. What's the minimum that you'd suggest that someone sort of starting out that's just, this is a bit unfamiliar to them, and what would you suggest as a bare minimum?
Oh yeah, that's a brilliant question, because I always say with anything quantum and nature, the bigger your problem, the more you need to ground. Because just to backtrack before I make some suggestions, we can get electrons from food as well, but only 30% of our electrons come from food. So if we're never charging up our electrons with the sun and never grounding, the body's going to ask us for more and more food electrons. And a lot of people, food and weight is a big issue to them. So from that level, if somebody was struggling with their weight and they know what they should be doing, and it just seems to be they can't stop eating food electrons. Somebody like that, they would need to do more grounding than, say, somebody who's pretty healthy but has heard about it and wants to start doing it. So as a sort of for a brand new person, the best time to do grounding would be to see the sunrise and ground, because that's basically setting your body clock for the day. And also you're grounded, so you're sucking in electrons, especially if you sort of slept in a bedroom with tech in a flat. So now you can go back down, charge yourself up, but also seeing the sunrise is absolutely vital for your body clock. And because sunrises are actually quite spectacular, some people try to say, well, I've done 2 minutes, I want to come in now. I'd say, well, give it a chance. Maybe take a drink out there, maybe walk around a bit. So I would say for a completely brand new person to try to do 10 minutes. And if they can't make the sunrise, then the morning sun, about 2 hours after sunrise, when the UV light's out, that's another time you get another bonus. And it's usually a bit warmer then. I know it's really warm in Australia at the moment, but in the winter, that would be another time to go out when it's warmer and maybe do your grounding then. But really, it's like when you try to get people to exercise for the first time. I always say to people, 30 minutes is the absolute sort of minimum to get benefits, but you can split it up into 3 10-minute blocks. So I would say for people with the grounding, if they could do 3 10-minute blocks, that would be brilliant. That's a really good start. But if they can't manage that, just to start off with 10 minutes at sunrise, because they're getting another bonus for their bodies, and then find ways to just take their shoes off, because the more you go outside, the more opportunities you've got to touch nature or take your shoes off. So somebody could go for a walk, sit down somewhere and take their shoes off and ground while they're having a drink. So once people know it's important, it's very, very easy to integrate into your day. And the other time it's really important is when you've traveled somewhere, because your brain's all confused and the aeroplane sucked the life force out of you. So when you go to a new location, grounding helps to tell your brain where you are on the planet. And when brains are confused, they get stressed and anxious. And most people will say that traveling is stressful and causes anxiety. So if you can ground as soon as you have the opportunity when you've traveled, it can make the jet lag less bad, but it can also start to undo the environment of the aeroplane as soon as possible. And also grounding can be really helpful for sleeping, that the more electrons we've got that are charged, the more energy we've got to let the body calm down and go to sleep. So it's back to, if somebody's got problems and they're not grounding, especially with anxiety, inflammation, sleep, or energy issues, that the more the better. And when people have got a problem and they find something that makes it go away, they'll just do it by themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's a great answer in terms of it really comes down to an individual level as to how much they need, and how well they are, how many electrons have actually, what they're already currently doing versus what they're not doing. And so that those that aren't doing much are going to need more. And so it's a really good guidance as to how they can go about helping themselves. I set a goal this year was to get out and see the sunrise every morning. And this morning I was out on the beach walking barefoot up and down the waterline. So that was one way I was grounding, at the same time getting charged up by the rising sun. So it's a little routine that I've set up and I love it. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yes, because definitely grounding on the beach in the wet sand and the sea, that's like a sort of super groundings. And again, not everybody has access to a beach, but if you do, it's a complete waste not to use it. So I definitely agree with that. And then even for people who, like I said, you can get grounding shoes for the people that walk a lot and just think, oh, nobody told me about grounding shoes, I'll just get them. So again, for some people, it's really easy to get hours of grounding in because they're outside all the time anyway. And you don't need to necessarily buy another shoe. You can buy things to attach to your shoe. They're not quite as good as obviously, nothing's better than bare feet, but anything's better than nothing. So, and again, grounding in nature away from electricity is really important, because I'm not a fan of grounding sheets and plugging things into the mains and stuff like that, just because it's an alien electromagnetic field. But again, I'm working on sort of making this course and this program for people where it's poor, acceptable, good, and excellent. Because I have had clients, if they just do everything that's acceptable, they get better. And obviously, as you know, there are people who want to do everything perfectly and they actually never get better because they're trying to be a perfectionist and they've become obsessed. So I always say anything that you do that you weren't doing before is better than nothing. And then once you understand how important it is, you'll just start doing it more by yourself because it's natural. It's natural to go outside. It's natural to be connected to planet Earth. Humans don't like being disconnected from the universe or tribes or other people. That they just get sucked into modern living and technology and being connected to Instagram, and that they forget where they're meant to be connected. So they'll naturally embrace it by themselves. And I think, like you said, if you've got something wonderful like a beach nearby or a forest, you should use it.
Yeah, 100%, Sarah. Just thinking in terms of, you mentioned the gathering of electrons, obviously grounding's a good source of gathering electrons. You mentioned food, electrons from food, and then you've spoken about losing electrons. So is there any other ways in which we can gather electrons other than grounding, food?
Yeah, there's if you make structured water, which is the exclusion zone water or living water or coherent water, it arranges itself into hexagons, and each hexagon pops out an electron. And this is because this is all completely natural, even though it sounds wooish. But when you have water that's crashed around in our water system and been chlorinated and pushed through pipes, it actually loses a lot of its coherence, or it's sort of dead, traumatized water. So structuring water, there's so many different ways you can do that. Even if you just put it out in the sun, you're giving it the water its life back, which that's how it would have been before we abused it. But then the other very important thing I want to say about electrons is there are things that steal them, like alcohol's an oxidizing agent, so that's going to steal electrons. And then fluoride in the water, that's the most electronegative element in the periodic table, and it wants everybody's electrons for itself. So that's one of the big issues with fluoride in the drinking water. And because you mentioned, you sort of touched on food, I always think clean water as in distilled and then remineralized, just to get the fluoride and the other 40,000 things out. That's something that's on a par with grounding, that it's not expensive to do that. You don't need to buy a $5,000 house filter. You can buy a tabletop distiller, and then putting minerals back in is very easy, and it's normal. That's how our water would have been before we made it dirty. So I think a lot of what I'm going to is just going back to how it should be with nature, and having clean water that's got minerals in it, that's alive again, because our ancestors would have just taken water out of rivers, so it would be flowing and vortexing and out in the sun anyway. So it's nothing wooish that people have invented, and also it's free anyway, pretty much, so nobody makes any money out of you doing that with your water. And then I think also technology is a big problem with electron stealing, because it's going to collapse some of your water battery. It shrinks the exclusion zone, and each hexagon, as I said, provided one electron. So if you shrink your exclusion zone water, the hexagons have gone now, and so is the electron. So if people do a lot of stuff on tech, they can nip out for grounding breaks as soon as they can, because the tech will suck stuff out of you, but you can then go outside and charge back up and then come back. Because I appreciate people do have jobs, me included, that involves technology. So I think it's just knowing how to recharge after you've been working a lot on tech, so that you can refresh yourself regularly. Then there's two more things I think is really interesting. So DHA, which is an omega-3 that comes from mainly seafood, that provides a lot of electrons. And places where there's less sun or it's very cold, like Scandinavia, that they are going to rely more on sort of food electrons from DHA, because yes, they can go outside, but sometimes it's ridiculously cold. And DHA is really interesting because it also turns light into electric current in the body. And that's how why one of the reasons it's so important for our brains is the way in which the DHA and the electrons it brings, they know exactly what they're supposed to do, exactly what they're supposed to do in the brain regarding signaling. And there's sort of very compelling evidence from people like Dr. Michael Crawford of how important DHA is for our brains and for our nervous system. And then finally, another way to get electrons is melanin. So that would be, people think melanin's just something that is a suntan, but it's way more than that because it's something called a black hole pigment. So it can absorb all wavelengths of light and it can emit light. It's also, because of this, it likes to gather everything in. Melanin can absorb toxins. But the other really interesting thing that melanin does, it can split water, and then melanin can make the water inside you break up into 4 electrons, hydrogen, and molecular oxygen. So your suntan can effectively provide electrons and energy for you, because with our bodies, we're constantly making and breaking things down. And if your body needs something, say the melanin on the skin, it'll sense, oh, hang on, why should that melanin be out there? I'll pull some in, and then I'll use it for, maybe there's a toxin in a particular area, or maybe some area of the body's short of energy. So it can pull the melanin in, and it can split the melanin, splits the water, and then we've got now a supply of oxygen, which everybody knows we need, and hydrogen, which I said is very important, and some electrons. So that's again why, another reason why not to be afraid of the sun, because that's where we can get our melanin from. And there's, if we think about something like Parkinson's, the substantia nigra, which is in the brain, it is nigra, it's black because it's full of melanin. And there's melanin everywhere in the body, in all of our nerves. It's around all of our cells, and it's also around the mitochondria, and it's on the outside of us. So it's obviously something really important, like water and hydrogen. If it's everywhere, it must do something, and it must be important. So that's again another way of how we can get more electrons.
Wow, that's so insightful. So, yeah, thank you for sharing all those different ways in which we can acquire electrons and keep our batteries charged. And also, as you said, in terms of what to watch out for around losing electrons, just discharging our batteries. So, it's really important that we stay clear of alcohol or minimize alcohol intake, and certainly filter our water to reduce the amount of fluorine getting into our system.
Yeah, definitely. And
Now,
also, I think the other thing, because if you try to tell people you mustn't do anything, if I've got friends that love having a beer, and it's like, okay, well, just go and do it outside then with your shoes off in the sun. But how people used to do. So even if somebody says, well, no, I'm not giving up my beer, it's like, okay, just for me, can you just go and do it outside? So again, like, I do have friends, and you probably know people, that everything, once they know something's dangerous, it's like, right, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm sleeping outside. I'm throwing out all my tech. I'm only going to eat strict carnivore, and I'm never going to a pub, and you can get really isolated doing that. And again, as I was saying, the other aspect of quantum is like connectedness to other humans, and we don't want to get so obsessive and stuff that we actually become isolated, or we end up, our kids going mad at us, or our partners wanting a divorce. So exactly as you said, if somebody knows they shouldn't be drinking alcohol and they're trying to cut down, or they're trying to stop, the more you tell them about things it's doing to cause more problems, they tend to be, oh, okay, right, I really am stopping now. But other people, you have to sort of think, well, if that's your favorite thing, just do it in a sort of better place.
Agree, outside, or
Yeah.
in a cold bath,
Yes,
yeah, just you've touched on food a number of times, so I'm really keen to explore the subject of nutrition with you around this, maximizing our electrons, minimizing electron loss. You've mentioned deuterium and its impact on the electron transport chain. We haven't delved into it in detail, but I'm really keen to explore how we can maximize our electrons without the loss, maximize our charge of our battery, our redox, with nutrition.
Okay, so just at the sort of very basic level, as I probably touched on, that about traumatized water, processed food is traumatized non-food that's lost all of its quantum information. But also, if we talk about sort of deuterium, the heavy hydrogen, anything that's involved in an industrial process, which is making processed foods, going to have a lot of deuterium in it. But also, sugar has got much more deuterium than fat. Processed food is full of processed carbohydrate, sugar. Seed oils have got a lot of deuterium, about 200 parts per million. So to be healthy, we want our personal deuterium to be about 130 to 140. But when it gets over 140 and 150, that's when health problems come out. And Glucose has, when people have measured it, its deuterium content is 150 to 155, and the seed oils are sort of over 200. So that straight away just says to people that processed food has got a lot of deuterium in it from different angles. It's not just the glucose and the seed oils, it's all the other chemicals that they add in as well. So I would just say that the processed food is a deuterium bomb. Then on the level of water batteries and our mitochondria, the mitochondria do actually prefer fat as a fuel because it's less inflammatory and it makes more water and it provides more electrons. However, evolutionarily, we would have eaten carbohydrates and glucose and stuff as well, but natural ones. So I'm not trying to tell people, all carbs are evil and all sugar's evil. It depends on the context because it's your environment dictates what you should be eating. And again, with tropical fruits, they're going to have a lot of deuterium in them. But people who live where the tropical fruit grow can deplete their deuterium in the sun, lots with the heat and stuff like that. So again, the fruit argument, I don't really want to get into it because with fruit, I just think if it grows locally and you pick it and eat it within 7 hours, you're going to get information and electrons from it. And if it's just growing naturally, sort of in your garden, it'd just be wasteful not to eat it. It's more when it comes to nutrition. And also that's a happy sort of apple if it just grew in your garden. It's not traumatized food, whereas sort of think fruit that's been shipped all over the world, goodness knows how old it is, and it's not the right kind of circadian or quantum match for where you live. So again, with the fat and carbs and protein, it's one of these things that also protein makes it makes a bit more water than fat, but fat makes the most. And also fat has the least deuterium as well. So it does make sense to people to tend towards a lower carb, more ketogenic diet. But again, it's for people where it gets very hot in the summer, it wouldn't be natural to try and force yourself to do that kind of way of eating when all the produce is growing. But it doesn't mean you should gorge on the fruit either. However, like I mentioned, one of my friends who's once he decides he doesn't like deuterium, so he's never going to eat sugar ever again, and he's like that. So I think sort of in a fundamental level, it's just about eating food that's actually proper food. I mentioned DHA again with the electrons, and marine food contains a lot of minerals as well, and it's predominantly fat and protein. So again, just eating local and seasonal produce, and then well cared for or well reared animals, chickens, eggs. Dairy is an interesting one, but again, it's like raw dairy is totally different to something that's been homogenized and pasteurized, and that can be why people have got a problem with it. And maybe once they've improve their redox, because when it comes to food, a lot of people just start to have reactions to bad food anyway, so they're naturally going to eliminate things, and that's why a lot of people go carnivore, because it's very simple and it's not inflammatory. A lot of people can't maintain it all the time, but a lot of people can. So they by themselves find, okay, I'm going to remove everything that's becoming inflammatory. Then they clean up their circadian practices and be aware of tech, and they find that their redox gets better, or they have more electrons, or their constitution's better, or they fix their gut microbiome, and now their body's more resilient and more tolerant, so they can reintroduce certain foods. Like dairy tends to irritate quite a lot of people, but then once they improve their redox, they find they can actually tolerate good quality raw dairy. So I think with nutrition, it's a lot about what are you trying to achieve, and is what you're eating right now moving you towards that goal. But also to remember, food isn't everything, and it's very easy to get sort of sucked into the food wars or everything's food, when yes, food's really important, but like I've been saying, we're not just a lump of meat. We've got this electrical component, this light component, and this water component. So if you get too obsessed with food and biochemistry and not do the other things, you're just missing out on sort of other sort of pillars of health because you've got obsessed with the food. So, but it is, as we all know, it is really important. I don't agree that you can just do anything you like and eat anything you like, but just do it outside in the sun. I don't agree with that. But I think, food's important, but there's a lot more that's more important, and people tend to miss that.
And so, in terms of like starting out, so someone hears this conversation that we're having today and has sort of expanded their mind, their awareness, level of awareness, and they're sort of wanting to make some change to improve their redox. What would you suggest that they start out doing first and foremost? And then what would they then go to next? Sort of like that, I guess that sort of staged approach to like, I guess not everyone's that zero to hero that will change everything overnight, but in terms of just making those simple, easy to implement changes that will make probably the most profound impact.
Okay, I'll just do the food really quickly. So that would just be remove seed oil, sugar, gluten, and dairy, and just leave everything else. It doesn't matter about carbs and potatoes, and just leave that for now. That's that there's plenty you can eat there. Then when it comes to doing circadian rhythm, so that's your body clock, to see the sunrise, then, and I'd say for a minimum of 10 minutes and grounded, then see the UV light. So that comes out, like I said, about 2 hours after sunrise. But there are plenty of apps like Circadian that can check, because that makes your brain make things like dopamine, serotonin, thyroid, painkillers, melanin. And then when it comes to the evening, to minimize the artificial blue light after sunset, because fundamentally, if we can't sleep properly, we can't deplete deuterium, we can't heal our mitochondria. So this routine of blocking the blue light or the artificial light, so you can use blue blockers, you can get red filters on your devices and screens, you can take the obnoxious LED lights out and change them for a more broad spectrum natural light, and dim them a bit. Not go to the supermarket shopping at 10 p.m. just before you're trying to get to sleep, and make time to make a sort of evening routine. Get off sort of phones and screens sort of 2 hours before bed, because it's not just the light, it's the flicker from the phone. And if you don't put a red filter on your phone, the artificial blue light steals all your dopamine. So midnight sort of evening snacking or bad behaviors are more likely if you've been exposed to screens and blue light all evening. It sucked all the dopamine out, and now your body wants to find something that you shouldn't be doing, because the phone stole all your dopamine. So just with that, just sort of to recap, the sunrise is to set the circadian rhythm. It's like the start, and lots of other hormones all depend on that sunrise. So if you miss that, it's like turning up to a football match late and somebody already scored a goal. So you've missed like it's a really important part of it. That then the UV rise, this is really important for your biological pharmacy. So I just say you can get high on your own supply, but it starts to make serotonin, which your brain's going to turn into melatonin for sleeping and repair later. But it won't be able to do that properly if you're just exposed to loads and loads and loads of artificial light in the evening. So that melatonin is it's going to get broken down, and then you're going to get bad sleep, or not be able to get to sleep, or not repair properly, or not recharge properly. And then, the next day, we all know when we've not slept well, we're more cranky, we're impatient, we don't want to exercise, we'd rather just eat sort of quick energy food. So that's what I would say would be for the basics of circadian rhythm. For water, like I said, just distill or reverse osmosis it. Get everything out, because filters sometimes are not great at getting the fluoride out. And there are so many things in the water now that it overwhelms them. And then remineralize, so just drink clean water. And then for the last bit, for the grounding, that's sort of tied in with, if you're going outside, just make time to just take your shoe off. Even if it's for sort of half a minute, you can take your shoe off and just put it on the earth, and that's going to reconnect you and fill you back up with electrons. But then obviously stuff's going to steal that later. So like anything is better than nothing. So that would be sort of like a very basic way of where people can get started. And any change is better than no change, and it doesn't have to be perfect. And there's a lot more that people can do. But if you overwhelm people, you get the analysis paralysis, or they can't do it anyway. So it's like giving people some things to do in different aspects of their health. And then once they can implement those, then maybe move it on to the next level. And certain people really resonate with some things more than others. Like some of my clients will really massively go down the water rabbit hole and want to make hydrogen water and deuterium depleted water and carbon dioxide water and do stuff with that. And other people get really into light, and they'll sort of open their windows all the time, change their light bulbs. They get quite religious about going out at certain times. And other people who've never really thought about their way of eating tend to sort of focus on that. So, but I always think that you want to do a bit of everything, not just become a light expert and ignore all the water, or become a food guru and just never do any grounding. You want to always bring in as much as you can. And then it's the same for movement. It's like that's really important on a quantum level, because it's really good for our brain, our frontal lobes, but also when we move, the fascia and the collagen, it's piezoelectric, so you can make your own electrons as you move. And it's like anything, any movement in the beginning is better than nothing. Even if somebody hasn't exercised for 10 years and they do half an hour of a chair-based exercise class, that's a really great start. Or even if somebody just went for a walk for half an hour, if they haven't really walked properly. And then anybody who's at that stage, no matter what, there's always more. So with movement, it's sort of like building your movement vocabulary, that as you make more and more complex movements, or learn a new sport, or go and do a different kind of exercise class, or learn dance, your fascia is going to start to move about in all different ways. So again, there's sort of the quantum side of movement, and anybody who's a listener who's into movement will completely agree of how important it is.
Absolutely. And what rabbit hole are you heading down now, Sarah?
Oh, actually, I'm in the carbon dioxide rabbit hole, but I've kind of nearly finished. And then there's something else. I'm just into something called cell salt. So I recently made a course on minerals, but like everything, what's in my head, I have to be really careful, because if I try and dump it on people, even though it's obvious to me, they're just like, oh, I can't cope. So I've walked them through the basic minerals that they've all heard of and ones that they haven't. But then this particular thing, which is about cell salts, it's sort of delving into homeopathy. But again, our ancestors have been at this for ages, and homeopathy is now outlawed or contraband in the US. And generally, if something's helpful, it gets banned. So I'm just, and with these particular 12 cell salts, they're things like magnesium sulfate or potassium phosphate. So they're nothing complicated, and they're just 12 of them. And it's just looking at like the next level of just using something really simple in a very low dose. Once people have learned about the important other minerals and they've done that, it's just, okay, there's more to these minerals than just, they're not just a lump of crystal, that there's other things to them. So I'm just kind of in that rabbit hole at the moment. But I think it's one of those things, it's like I tend not to go into like crazy rabbit holes that I can't share with people, because the other rabbit hole I'm in is sort of the Dan Winters rabbit hole, or all about the 0 point energy and toroidal fields. But sometimes that's so abstract to say my dad or my mum, they would just be thinking you've gone completely crazy. Whereas if you talk to my mum and dad about minerals and how they're helpful in the body, and how we can miss a mineral and get a symptom, and how we don't need very many minerals, and they're cheap, and that, you know, if it doesn't work, it's not going to hurt you, they would totally be all right with being a guinea pig for that. Whereas some of the more sort of Dan Winters stuff and toroidal waves and cosmic towers, to my mum and dad, it's like, right, no, I don't want to know about that part of quantum. That's more metaphysics, but it's still quantum physics as well. No, I'm not interested. So I think it's also about, with rabbit holes, part of it's my interest, but a lot of it's driven because I've got clients and customers, and I'm doing it because I want to help somebody else. So my energy isn't just focused on me and what I want, because I don't really have any problems at the moment. My mum and dad might dispute that, but in terms of helping others, it's like the rabbit holes are just as much for them as it is for me. In fact, they get more out of the rabbit hole, but then I tend to go down it first. And I like to make sure I've fully got all the rabbits out of the rabbit hole, because sometimes if you go into too many rabbit holes but not properly, that's a real recipe for getting really confused, messing stuff up. Whereas, you know, I think it's great to go in a rabbit hole, but just stay in it and get all the rabbits out. Don't get tempted by shiny new object syndrome and then come out of the rabbit hole and then go and find another one. Because I'm sure you know lots of people as well that go down all these rabbit holes at the same time. And then they end up worse than they were before, and even more confused and even more mad. So
Totally.
yeah. Well, which rabbit hole are you in?
Probably the light, magnetism, and water. They're
Right.
the ones that I want to get some mastery there and a real understanding. I'm certainly a why person. I like to get down and understand the why and the mechanics. So yeah, quantum physics and all that is right down my alleyway. So I'm really enjoying the rabbit holes. In terms of the carbon dioxide, is that breathing oriented, or what's the carbon dioxide thing
It's
that you?
both, because there's about 100 years of research with carbon dioxide, so you can make baths of it like a face plunge, because it's a very unusual sensation, and then your body senses too much carbon dioxide and it kind of rushes oxygen and stuff into your face. So I'm very much more into that than people putting weird, horrible things on their faces to improve the skin tone. But then there is sort of the problem we have with carbon dioxide is it's that a lot of people don't have any tolerance to it. So if they're sat in a car or sleeping at night with everything all closed in, it can build up to about 3,000 parts per million. So that's obviously massively stressful to the body. And it can cause inflammation. So you can also do sort of CO2 breathing protocols where you can expose yourself to carbon dioxide gas for 6 minutes just to get your body to stop overreacting so much to high CO2, because a lot of people sort of are reasonably tolerant to it, but there are other people that are really sensitive and they've got no idea why they keep waking up in like 4 a.m. with anxiety, or why they hate being in a car so much. So there's that sort of side of it as well. And then, like anything to do with biology or quantum biology, it does all just revolve around carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, deuterium, and electrons. So carbon is fundamentally important. So that's why it being carbon dioxide, I don't think this is like a nasty thing that is a greenhouse gas. There's plenty of, it's been a bit demonized. Let's look into why did hospitals always stock carbon dioxide cylinders instead of oxygen cylinders? And most people know if you have a panic attack, you breathe into a paper bag. So there's a lot to be said about there's different ways to play with CO2, and it's something that once people know about it, they can look it up themselves. Because for some people, breathing a gas is like no way, but for some people, doing a face plunge with fizzy water instead of ordinary water for a change, it's like a cheap facial. They might be really into that, and they can't really hurt themselves there. But also, there are sort of just fundamental ways to retrain your breathing. So yeah, you're correct there. You want it to be rhythmical and through the nose. And then there are certain devices people that can get to retrain their face muscles, because some people have learned how to breathe badly and it's changed sort of their facial structures, and it's subtle. But if we can't breathe properly, or we can't get the carbon dioxide out properly, or our breathing's all incoherent and all over the place, it just creates more chaos or more bother for the body. So it's like water, that even though people think they know how to breathe properly, some people mouth breathe all the time. And again, it's just an interesting thing to explore. And I think, again, I always go and dig out research and techniques that people have been using for hundreds of years that have been stuffed under the carpet by different big sort of billion-dollar corporations that don't have our best interests at heart. So there's a lot to be said for older remedies that have got forgotten about.
You shared so much wisdom to the Me and My Health Up listeners. I'm really keen for you to share more about your coaching groups, your podcast, and all the other great courses that you do. So please share with listeners how they can reach out and best connect with you.
Yeah, so I have social media, and it's Busy Superhuman, and it's TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And the YouTube, there are some short educational videos, but then there are interviews with people like Dr. Cruz and Michael Crawford and Dr. Pollock and other experts in their field as well. And then little videos to sort of explain it, because some of it sometimes goes quite deep, but a lot of the listeners like the deep stuff. But also, anybody can learn how to end up going really deep into physics. You just need to start somewhere and don't get overwhelmed. Then I've got a monthly membership group that we have live Zooms per week, and it's an open forum for discussion. And that's sort of worldwide. There are people in New Zealand and Australia in there. There are people in the US, in the UK. So I have sort of that option. And then I've got a variety of courses. So I've got a minerals course, a basic quantum biology course, and I'm at the moment making a new course, which is all about, I've sort of touched on it, sort of quantum levels, that there's all of this stuff that we could do, but how do I start? And what's too much? what can I mix together? So you kind of really touched on that everybody has to start somewhere, and some people, all they want to do is light and red light, and I'm like, no, you need to do other things. So the quantum levels course is sort of about, you can start here and then you can progress out. And like I said, I think before, I've had people who only ever did everything to the acceptable level and got better and were completely happy. So it's sort of a way to have a sort of quantum roadmap, as in, how do I start? How do I not go to excess? How do I not spend stupid amounts of money by accident? And where should I be going? What options are there? And then how do I so it's like a very practical course, because it's important to know the theory. Otherwise, we could be just making all of this up. But then also people need to have a protocol, but we're all completely different. So there's no one size doesn't fit all. That's why people keep asking me, well, just give me a piece of paper and tell me everything to do. It's like, it doesn't work like that. There's situations change. We live in different environments. One person might need loads of red light. Another person might need loads of cold. Another person might have real trouble with particular foods, but and that's their big place. They need help. So that's why with the quantum levels, it's sort of practical. And also, again, to stop people thinking they always need to be perfect and have the most expensive of everything, that acceptable or good in the different categories can make sort of really move the needle.
Yeah, and listeners, I'll include those links that Sarah's spoken about, such as her social media and also her coaching group and her courses, all in the show notes. So they'll all be in the show notes. So just go to the show notes and you can connect with Sarah that way and join her coaching group. So just want to say a massive thank you, Sarah, for putting aside your time, coming in, sharing all your wisdom with the Me and My Health Up listeners. And I think you've got so much more to share. I'll certainly get you on for another part 2 at some point down the road.
Oh, that would be lovely. It's been a real pleasure to speak to you. I've really enjoyed it. Well worth my, I know that you actually are in a different time zone and you've sort of specially accommodated me, because I didn't want to do 8 a.m. here because I would miss the sunrise, but you really kindly accommodated it and we did 9. So I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, Sarah. And I'll share it. Like, you'll get these reels on TikTok, and these will go onto Instagram, and it's on YouTube and on all the podcasting apps. So it's certainly going to reach a vast audience. So I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to our next chat.
Oh, yes, that'll be fun. Definitely. I'll look forward to it as well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.